Trying to.
Hello, Lean In Together, Minneapolis, St. Paul. I'm Elizabeth Lakin, here with Jessica Bennett, New York Times reporter and contributing editor to leanin.org, with her book, Feminist Fight Club, Strategies and Tactics for Combating Today's Sexism in the Workplace. And in front of me, on these papers, I have the questions you've submitted, and then we're going to go for some live audience questions. So be thinking about what Jessica is here to talk about and send in those questions. So, Jessica, hello, and thank you. Thank you for talking
so much
to the
for
reading
doing
group.
this.
So I'm going to just start right off because we don't have a lot of time. And the first question is, for so many women, the only times we interact with men are when they are bosses and managers. And since your book covers the strategies and tactics on dealing with men in the workforce, what techniques would you recommend when we're not dealing with a peer situation?
Right, when you can't call your boss out for interrupting. Yeah.
Exactly.
So I think a lot of this is about also developing allies. And so in every workplace, you're not necessarily going to be the sole person who can call a behavior out in any given circumstance. You know, every situation is so individual, and some people have more power than others. So what I always find to be really effective is, in fact, rather than, let's say you're in a meeting and either your idea is taken and credited to someone else, or you're constantly being interrupted. So, okay, I'm not going to interrupt my boss to tell him to stop interrupting me, but perhaps my female colleague who's a little more senior on the totem pole can be like, hey, can you pause for a moment? I wanted to wait to hear what Jess had to say. And I also think some of these strategies, you know, are going to work no matter what when you're dealing with a boss. Negotiating is going to usually happen with a boss, and you're going to have to be comfortable explaining to them why you need more money if in fact you do need and deserve more money. So I think that, you know, case by case basis, like, know the situation. Obviously, you're not going to call a boss out in front of the entire staff for something that he or she has done, but I think there's a time and place to potentially take that person aside and have a conversation with them.
And you feel that if there are women who are more senior to you, it's a good step to go up to them and say, in this meeting, ahead of time maybe, to sort of say, I think I'm going to be presenting this, and have my back?
Yes, and in fact, I've done that. You know, the person doesn't even need to be a senior person necessarily, and it doesn't necessarily need to be a woman either, but I have done that in scenarios where I know I'm going in and presenting a big something, and I've asked people to support me beforehand, before going into the meeting. So I think that establishing these relationships and these allyships, you know, it's not going to happen immediately. You're not going to walk up to a stranger and say, can you back up my idea in this meeting? But over time, you're going to develop strategies for perhaps forming a fight club of your own in your office, where you're going to consider each other allies, and you're going to naturally have one another's back. And I think that in all of these scenarios, there's power in numbers. Mm-hmm. You know, you are more likely to be penalized if you're calling behavior out on your own, but if you have people to back you up, then, you know, probably it's going to make a difference.
One of the things I really liked about the book is that it is talking about shifting behavior over time and through repeated initiatives.
Yes, with other initiatives. Yeah, I mean, you know, none of this stuff is a perfect solution. Like, you're not going to call someone out for interrupting you once and then it's never going to happen again. It's having to call it out over and over and over again, which, should we have to do this? No. But over time, I do think that people start to recognize their own behavior. And one of the points I try to make throughout the book is that, yes, it's written in the language of war. So I have a section on the enemy, and these are the people that do things to you, like interrupt you, like steal your ideas, like repeat what you're saying and then get credit for it. But the reality is that a lot of this stuff is unconscious, and it's not just acted out by men, it's often acted out by women too. And I think most of us want to be supportive colleagues, and so if we can recognize our behavior, perhaps by someone else calling it out, then probably we're going to start correcting for it on our own, I hope.
It's a larger reframing of what behavior in the workplace is and who manifests it.
I hope so.
So, Feminist Fight Club has a lot of different techniques, and I'm wondering which you've experimented with successfully and unsuccessfully. Like, has that shifted over the course of time?
Well, so for what it's worth, I have failed at all of these things in the book at one point or another. I have successfully achieved some of them. I have probably failed before I achieved them. And part of the process of me writing this book was to go through all of the data and the research about ways to react to some of these scenarios that you face every day and be like, oh, when this happened to me, I responded this way and it was a failure. How could I respond more effectively? And what does the research show about that? So the title of the book, Feminist Fight Club, comes from my real-life women's group. It's a group of women that I've been meeting with since I began my career about a decade ago, and we would gather monthly in somebody's living room. Today we're in my living room. This is our own Feminist Fight Club today. And we would practice a lot of these things. So one of us would need to go in and negotiate a raise. We would talk about it beforehand. We would share strategies with one another. And we would report back after it had happened. So I'll give you one example, negotiation. Something that to this day I hate doing, I'm terrible at doing it. I wish that I could do it I wish that I could do it in writing because I get so flushed and stuttering essentially. But when I was at Newsweek, I was a reporter at Newsweek magazine, and I found out that my male colleague, who was a friend of mine, was making $10,000 more than I was, and he had the exact same position and title and job duties. We were very low level at this time, so $10,000 was a huge amount of money. So what did I need to do? I needed to go negotiate for more. And my plan was not to walk in and say, this man is making more than me, you need to make this even, though I did keep that in my back pocket. My strategy was that I would go in and present the case for why I, in fact, deserved more money, and keep that as a back strategy. And so I did it, and I ultimately did it successfully, but it was not a perfect process. It was bumpy. I went in and I was very nervous. I had written down all of these different accomplishments and tried to, in writing, it's hard to quantify your successes. And so I tried to find numbers of any kind, whether it was like traffic on the website or the number of people who had watched me on television hits, to try to say, I brought in X, Y, and Z for this company, and this is why I deserve this. And of course, I went in and I had this perfectly printed out bullet point list, and I forgot everything on it. So in that in-person conversation, I would say I didn't do a great job, but when I left, I followed up with an email that listed all of it, and so ultimately I got the raise, and I didn't have to bring out the threat of, this guy's making more than me, you better fix this.
But it would have been a much more difficult situation if you hadn't had your group of women to sort of run it through before you went to face the Gorgon, your boss.
I think for a lot of this stuff, practice is really important. These are muscles that you can build, and so I practice all of this stuff. I continue to. We still meet. We have a rule that whenever someone does something great, we usually congratulate them or send out an email, and it's very typical that the person receiving the accolades or the praise will be like, oh, it's no big deal. And we have a you must brag rule. You must take credit for this accomplishment, and sometimes it's someone pinging you via an email or literally kicking you under the table to be like, just say thank you for this accomplishment. And so yes, it's this force that I feel that I always have of people behind me who are poking me and reminding me of my worth and value.
Because it's larger than the workforce, that we need to reframe how women behave and the expectations that are different for men and women. So practice.
Yes, practice. Maybe it doesn't make perfect in this scenario. Every situation is different, but it does build these muscles.
And the confidence.
Yeah, and confidence, so important.
So the book came out last fall, and you've been touring around and talking to a lot of different groups, like ours. And I'm just wondering what you've learned from interacting with the people who've read the book, and would you change anything in the book when there's a second edition?
Yeah, so in fact there is an updated paperback that comes out in June, and so I have in fact just updated it
for
that.
Very
so I can tell you what's in the new version. But I'll start with what I've learned. It's been amazing to go around the country and talk to different people about their experiences, and over and over and over again, people have really individual stories everyone is struggling with this in some way. One of the really positive things I've noticed is, so much of this book is about bosses need to take action, we need to fix our workplaces, and if you have the power to do so, use it for good. But I actually spoke with a lot of women who, in their own quiet ways, are fighting for equality in their workplaces. So, for example, there was an executive assistant that came to one of my events, and she explained to me that she's in charge of scheduling everything. So anyone that wants a meeting with the executive, and these are usually important meetings, she schedules it and she sets up the plan for the day and where the conference room will be and where you'll meet. So what she will do is she will save seats at the table for women when there is a meeting. She will just quietly do it by either putting an agenda on the seat or something else. And she ensures through this tiny little move that women are actually taking a seat at the table and engaging in the conversations. And to me, that was sort of mind-blowing because I hadn't thought about, what role can somebody who's in a really low-level position play in helping for women to rise up and fight for equality, and then this woman was doing it. So I think that a lot of women are fighting for this cause in their own quiet ways, even if it's not necessarily visible. As for, so the elephant in the room is Donald Trump.
Right.
And I went into writing this, like I think many people, and many people specifically in the media, assuming that we were going to have a female president. And so what a great time to talk about female empowerment when we have the first female president. Yes.
The ultimate
so that didn't happen, obviously, and whatever side of the political debate you may be on, Donald Trump has said some things that many people find offensive. And how do these subtle microaggressions that I'm talking about in the book, things like viewing women as bossy or pushy, things like overcoming imposter syndrome, things like being interrupted or mansplained to when we speak, how do these apply when you have somebody in power who's trying to take away these very large rights? And so I define subtle sexism in the book as these kind of underneath the surface, small microaggressions we face every day that many times we don't even notice or recognize as sexism, but they add up. And suddenly it feels like what we're facing is anything but subtle. So I had to update the book to reflect that in some way, and so I wrote a new foreword that's essentially about, what we're experiencing now is over, and now is the time for people to come together more than ever. But I also think that subtle sexism really did play a role in this election, and it was there in the way that so many people disliked Hillary Clinton, even people who supported her. They just didn't really like her. And, that goes back to all of the research that shows that we don't like women when they gain power.
Right.
And things like the scrutiny of her accomplishments versus the scrutiny of his. Well, women have to be twice as accomplished and have achieved twice as many things to be perceived on the same level as a man. Women's mistakes are remembered more, longer, and scrutinized more. So Hillary Clinton has made mistakes. She is definitely not perfect, but we kept honing in on those mistakes over and over and over again, and not so much on the male candidate. So I think that this stuff is still ever present underneath the surface, even though some of the issues we may face now feel more overt. So I wrote a new foreword, and then the last thing I did was the very last chapter of the book is how to start your own feminist fight club. And initially, a lot of the suggestions for activities were things like crafting or making a vision board with your goals, or drinking games. Anyway, you can still do all of that, but there are also really tactical things that people on any side of the political spectrum can do, like calling your local congressperson or going to a town hall meeting. So I've made it a bit more political with concrete actions that people can take.
That's fantastic. So in that bygone era, when we thought things were getting better and we were only dealing with the subtle manifestations of sexism, when you were writing the book and publishing the book, did you experience any resistance to that? And did anyone tell you not to write this book, or that this wouldn't be a good topic for the book?
Actually, no, which was very encouraging. So I had this process in the very beginning. I knew I wanted to do this book, I knew I wanted to call it Feminist Fight Club because that's what we always joked our real life group was. And the reason for that was that we didn't talk about the club outside of the club. We now, of course, talk about the club outside of the club. The first rule of the Feminist Fight Club is you must talk about the Feminist Fight Club. But I was worried that that was too aggressive of a title. You know, I was very specific in that I didn't want to go with a niche feminist press. I wanted to go with a mainstream press. I had worked for Sheryl Sandberg. I had done a lot of work with Lean In. I really saw the value of being able to reach as many people as possible. And I thought that that would be best accomplished through somewhere like HarperCollins, which is who I ultimately went with. But I was worried that they were not going to like it and that it would feel too either academic or too aggressive. You know, it says Fight Club in the title, so it is purposefully aggressive. But to my surprise and encouragement, that wasn't the case. There were a bunch of different publishers that bid on it, all of them mainstream presses, and in fact, at a certain point when I was wavering, saying, should I call this Lady Fight Club? It was my male agent, to his credit, that was like, no, you're not changing the title. Feminist Fight Club is a better title. We're going forward with that. So I actually think that says something about where we are today. The word feminist is more socially accepted, it's more embraced, and I think that even, 5 years ago, had I gone forward pitching a book like this and presenting a proposal with this title, I'm not sure the same reaction would have happened.
So it's 2 steps forward,
Yeah.
1
Exactly.
step back. 2 steps forward, 1 step
Yes,
back,
exactly.
or backwards in high heels.
Right.
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 So you had an ally who was a man in this case,
Yes.
and you talk a lot in the book about what men can do to help with this and to help change things. How can we open this conversation, this Feminist Fight Club conversation, open up to the men in our office and our world?
Yeah, so I think it's so important to talk to men about this stuff. Like, men are not the enemy as much as I may poke fun at them throughout the book. And you'll see on the cover, there's a little asterisk and it says, this book is 21% more expensive for men.
Love that.
A reference to the wage gap, which is now 20%, so like, yay, we've gained a penny. But, men can be some of our strongest allies, and I think it's so important to include them in the conversation. A lot of times when I'm talking about this, I will get a question from one of the men in the audience, and usually there are just a few, saying, I'm often really hesitant to talk about these issues because I'm afraid I'm going to say something wrong. And I think that's a really important thing to acknowledge, in that much in the same way that I think white people are hesitant to talk about race because they might say something wrong, I think that men are often afraid to enter this conversation. So my best advice is to just be really welcoming and understand that we're all going to screw up at some point. Like I do this as well. I notice my own unconscious bias at times. And, there are men who want to help and there are men who don't. But if somebody wants to engage in the conversation, I think it's really important to welcome them, because ultimately, we can't win this battle without them.
Right.
And so I think that they're so important. The book is humorous. There's a lot of jokes. And I think that has been a really effective strategy towards opening the conversation and talking about some otherwise really difficult topics. So I try to kind of balance the light with the serious, and I've found that to be a very effective way of talking about these issues with people who may not necessarily be comfortable.
So, are there questions coming in from the audience?
I just posted that if anybody would love to ask a question, let's hear them. Let's see if any roll in. Take another question while we're seeing if anybody has any.
Yeah.
What about, we're talking feminism, female equality is a strong theme in your book. Are there other drivers in your own personal journey, such as social justice or reducing poverty, that you feel move forward when women achieve equality in the workplace?
Yeah, I think that this is absolutely intertwined, or intersectional, as people would say. Like, you can't talk about women without talking about race and class and poverty and gender identity. And so I think it's really important to think about all of these things as we're talking about women's issues. And women thriving in the workplace is ultimately going to hopefully bring women out of poverty. Women are the majority of the workforce, they are also the ones who are in poverty the most in this country. So figuring out ways that we can be inclusive and encourage all women to thrive. And ultimately what we know from Lena, and in fact, and for what it's worth, so much of the research that I did in this book was inspired by Cheryl and Lena, who basically taught me, you do not say anything unless you're backing it up with data. Like I said to Cheryl when the book came out, I learned that from you. All of those 500 footnotes in the back, that is like, those are dedicated to you and Lena. But I think it's so important to back things up with data and to talk about this stuff inclusively. And we know that, you know, companies and societies thrive when there are more women in power.
Right. And I mean, yesterday was
Equal pay day.
Equal pay day, but if you actually look at the statistics, equal pay day for Black women workers is later in the year, and for Hispanic women, Native American women, and I mean, hopefully it's, you know, lifting all the boats up, but we have to work hard to make sure that everyone is
and for what it's worth, I do think that
covered.
I do think that the feminist movement right now is doing a much better job of talking about intersectionality and making sure that race and class are taken into the equation than I think you would have seen even a few years back. And yes, yesterday was Equal Pay Day. I kept seeing people say, Happy Equal Pay Day. And I was like, no, it's not happy. Yeah. It's so Equal Pay Day being the day in calendar year 2017 that all women on average would have to work to catch up with what men already made in 2016. But if you break it down by race, African American women have to work much longer, and Hispanic women have to work even longer. So it's important to also note those as we're talking about this.
So we did get a question in from the audience, and it is, what will be the thing that tells you we've made progress?
Oh, that's a great question. The numbers, I think. You know, until women are leading half of our companies and men are half of the ones doing caretaking at home, I don't know if we can call this a success. So that applies to the gender wage gap as well. You know, it's not a success if we're still making 20% less. But I also think it's really important to focus on small victories too, because this can feel overwhelming. Part of the reason why I tried to write this book in a way that is like a manual, so you can open it up to any page and find the part that applies to you, and it's bite-sized, is that when I was beginning my career and starting to care about these issues and starting to notice them, it often felt completely overwhelming in terms of what I was supposed to do. You know, I believed in equality. I wanted to fight for equal pay. I wanted to fight for structural things like a higher minimum wage. But like, how was I, as a 23-year-old young journalist, going to do this? But what I could do was make sure that when my friend and colleague at work did something great, I was acting as her boast bitch and bragged on her behalf so that she would get credit for her work. Or if I saw something that I felt was unjust, I would speak out about it. Right. And that was how I could take this stuff on in my daily life, because I think a lot of these things are small actions that we can all take in our daily workplaces.
So a couple more questions have come in. So you being a boast bitch, and you reaching out to help the women around you, perhaps you've seen in some of your work situations women who aren't doing that. How do you best confront women who are not supporting other women, who are undermining or staying neutral on, what is it, Howard Zinn, you can't stay neutral on a burning train?
Yeah, so it's tough. You know, female competition is a real thing. And I haven't always had amazing female mentors, though I ended up having a lot of them. So what I typically say to this is, A, understand where this is coming from. This is, history. This is hundreds and hundreds of years of women being taught that there are only a few places for you at the top or for you in whatever the workplace is. And so as a result, you must compete against one another to get one of those slots. And so this is almost ingrained in us really culturally. And so for me, understanding where the competitiveness was from when I found it in myself was really helpful towards overcoming it. So I think there's two things you can do. Kill them with kindness, number one. Like, truly just try to welcome that person, ask them out for a drink, say maybe you got started off on the wrong foot, but you want to be allies, like we're in this together. And two, notice this behavior in yourself, because what the research shows is that 95% of women have felt undermined by another woman at work at some point throughout their careers. So, okay, if 95% of us have felt that, then clearly most of us have also been the person on the other end at some point. So I think it's about checking our own behavior, but also really trying to welcome others, even when we may not agree with what they're doing.
So much of having to deal with this is stressful, and it makes you angry and outraged. So any tips on how to maintain a sense of inner peace when feeling outraged about inequality?
Right, like how do I not want to kill myself every day? Yes.
That's a perfect way to phrase it.
For me, I use humor.
Okay.
I have to laugh about this stuff sometimes because otherwise I would be too depressed. And, these are not laughing matters, but they can be funny in the moment. So I laugh about them with the members of my fight club who are always full of amazing jokes and there to support me. And, sometimes we get together and we bitch and sometimes we cry, but we also laugh at ourselves and at the situation. So to me, humor is a really amazing way. And I think that camaraderie as well. We are social beings. Having others who are going to have your back and support you is going to lessen the individual stress that we feel.
Do you feel that nurturing women's camaraderie within the workspace actually has a chance of making workspaces less toxic? Because I feel that so much of what's acceptable now as the framework of how work has to happen is this decades, centuries-old male framework, and a woman might be more cooperative.
Right.
And it might be a less toxic framework for everyone.
I think that nurturing relationships and female camaraderie has no downside in any context. So the only thing it can be is beneficial either for you or maybe for your institution. So there's no reason why we shouldn't do it. And I think that in the workplaces, Lean In has been such a good example because we've been able to track through corporations which companies have Lean In circles on their campuses, or not campuses, whatever you call them. And you've seen that those companies have actually made real change institutionally. And so it's not just that the women feel more welcomed and supported, it's that actually there has been not really trickle down, but a trickle up effect where CEOs and executives have actually made company policies to make sure that they are solving for things like equal pay or making sure that they have more women in leadership roles.
That's terrific. So we're going to move on to a lightning round of questions. These are questions that, they're quick questions, and we want just sort of quick, spontaneous answers.
Got it.
Okay. Favorite feminist today?
Roxanne Gay.
Good answer. You recently were in Chicago, I hear?
Yes.
And what's the one thing you love about the Midwest?
I barely got to see Chicago, but I love the people. They're so welcoming and so nice. They remind me of my hometown of Seattle.
That's cool. Gender equality or gender equity?
Oh. What's the difference?
What is the difference?
I say gender equality because I think that that's what most people use these days as the best word, but I don't know if I can lightning round this. Gender equity.
This was a question from Linda in Minneapolis, so if you want Linda, tell us what you mean. I should have asked on Sunday.
Would you like a definition from Google?
Yeah.
Gender, this says gender equality.
Oh, okay.
All right, we'll move on and we'll reply.
So, guilty pleasure. Tell us your guilty pleasure.
Gummy candies. I eat them for breakfast. It's probably very unhealthy, and my dentist would be
Trader Joe's has gummy vitamins.
I have those too. That's my vice.
Okay, what was the last book that you really loved?
I just read Ariel Levy, who's a writer at The New Yorker, her memoir called The Rules Do Not Apply, and it's about kind of coming to the realization that she could not have it all. It's a beautifully written memoir about love and loss and going through a terrible miscarriage, and it was amazing.
what homework would you want all of us to do?
So you're already in a lean-in circle, which I feel like it's a feminist fight club, so you're already doing that. Find a boast bitch. That's my easiest assignment for everyone. You know, this term originated from when I was at Newsweek magazine. My best friend was a woman named Jessie, and we often worked together, and we both were hesitant to brag about our accomplishments. And so we at one point decided, like, we're going to be each other's boast bitches, and every time one of us does something great, the other one will send an email and CC all of the appropriate higher-ups that need to see it, and it will make you look good because you're getting credit. It will make me look good because I'm a good, supportive colleague, and it's so easy to do. So find a boast bitch.
Okay, so I'm not great at time, so we have a few more minutes. So I'm going to do. I shouldn't have gone to lightning round so fast, but lightning round really was.
Lightning round is fun.
I'm back to gender equity. If you want to address that.
Okay.
Gender equity is the process of being fair to women and men. To ensure fairness, strategies and measures must often be available to compensate for women's historical and social disadvantages that prevent women and men from otherwise operating on a level playing field. Equity leads to equality.
Oh, so then I'm for both.
Yeah.
That's a good definition. I mean, I think that, to me, gender equality actually does mean working with women and men to achieve a more equal world.
One of the questions that had come in was about mentorship.
Mm-hmm.
Now, have you been lucky enough to find one, and what impact do you feel it made?
I mean, so those of you in this group may know, but I have been lucky enough to have like the ultimate mentor, which is Sheryl Sandberg, and so like it doesn't get much better than that. I've also been lucky to have a lot of supportive women throughout my career, and I was actually just talking to one today who I didn't even know very well, but I was on a listserv with her, and when I got fired from my job at Tumblr, when they decided they no longer wanted to do journalism, so they were getting rid of our department, I had sent like a frantic email to this listserv I remember. It's a women's listserv, different from my Feminist Fight Club. And this woman who's a writer at the New York Times, this amazing magazine writer, replied and was like, do you want to get coffee? And I didn't know her. And she took me out for coffee, and she was like, you need to start pitching the New York Times. And I was like, I'm not good enough to pitch the New York Times. Like, I don't know anyone there. Like, I haven't been writing that much lately. I've been in this like tech job. And she was like, just do it. I'm going to put in a good word for you with a woman that she would ride the train in with that worked in the style section, and I want you to start pitching. And so I did, and I write for them all the time now. And I don't think that I would have actually taken the first step to pitch the story had she not encouraged me. So it was just that tiny sense of encouragement that I think went such a long way. I also think that there's so much talk about mentorship now that it can feel, for people just starting out, stressful, like how do I find a mentor? Where do I find a mentor? And Sheryl Sandberg has written about this. But I have a concept in the book called finding a PBOD, which is a personal board of directors. And this is essentially a group of peers, like the women of your lean-in circle, like your Feminist Fight Club, who you can turn to if you're trying to make a decision or have a problem. And they weigh in on your professional life, you weigh in on theirs. It's sort of a give and take, but not necessarily one person is in a senior level role. And as we all know from Lean In, peer mentorship has been found to be just as effective as the other kind.
Because it's important. The important step is putting yourself out there and opening yourself up to a community of other people and seeing that we're not doing this in isolation. That's the trap they've had us all in.
Right,
is that we're all doing it alone and we need to do it together.
And I have, for what it's worth, I've had these amazing mentors, but I have like 5 different PBOTs. I have all the, people don't even know that they're in my personal board of directors, and they are. But over time, I've just developed all sorts of people who are helpful to me when I'm in a rut or when I have a problem.
All right, so we're going to wind up now, and I have one more lightning round question, because we're going to bring it back to that. And what is the thing that is awesome about you? So, boast
oh my
bitch
God, so I
yourself.
have to brag on myself.
You have to boast bitch yourself.
I think I'm pretty funny.
I agree.
I laugh at my own jokes.
It just made us laugh.
And you know, I'm a good boast bitch for others.
Next thing you're gonna do. No.
That I don't know.
No, that's,
Maybe write another book.
that's huge. Well, I hope you do, because that book is eminently readable
Thank you.
and a lot of fun and a lot of good history. Get to the back where there's really good history about the women's movement. But for the Minneapolis-St. Paul Lean-In group, we are presenting you, because you are our Wonder Woman.
Oh my god, I've been wanting these.
It's the Wonder Woman postage stamps.
I love it.
And
Thank
a big
you so
thank
much.
you for giving your time.
Yeah, so fun. Thank you.
Bye, everyone.